So before we get started, I just want to touch on the native Civil 3D and AutoCAD QTO tools. This gives us some perspective as to what we're trying to solve with the CTC Data Wizard. And I'm going to go through these here. The QTO Manager is one. I find it to be rather clumsy, rather error-prone. It can work with AutoCAD and some Civil 3D objects, but it's really tough to know what you're scanning for. The outputs on it are very limiting. I know very few people who actually successfully use it. And if they do, it's not something they can use for all the objects they want to scan for. The other one is AutoCAD Data Extraction. It's a handy tool. In fact, if you're familiar with it, you're going to see some similarities with that tool and our tool here, the Data Wizard tool. But there's a big limitation. One, it only does AutoCAD objects. And two, a big piece of Data Wizard, not our focus today, but is creating legends, and it inserts graphics. So block symbols, point symbols, line types, hatch samples. It'll insert that stuff automatically into legends. So the next one's Civil 3D Tables. They're pretty nice. They're really dynamic, right? But they don't spit out to Excel, and they don't combine similar items, right? They just list one row for one object. Well, what if I'm trying to count up 50 of one particular item, or sum the lengths of a bunch of polylines or feature lines? I can't do that with Civil 3D tables. Sample lines are another tool set in Civil 3D that allows us to get quantities from, but there's a big limitation. They're alignment based, and you can only work with corridor shapes and corridor surfaces rather to get quantities. So very limiting again. There's a volume dashboard, handy tool, easy to use, but really it's only for surface volumes. And finally, which I think a lot of people do for at least some of their quantity, their quantification, is just manually counting, picking on objects, maybe doing a select similar, and then looking at properties to get total counts. It's a big waste of time, obviously. I don't have to tell you guys that. And it can be really error-prone if you're transferring or manually typing data into Excel as you check those quantities. So what we're trying to do is take all of these things, these different areas that these tools solve or sort of solve, and do it all with one tool. And that's where Data Wizard comes into play. So just an overview quick of Data Wizard, what it is, and then we'll dive into the QTO workflows. It's about detailed quantity takeoffs. It's also about creating drawing-specific legends. Data Wizard, in a nutshell, it scans any number of drawings for AutoCAD and or Civil 3D point, line, or area objects and pushes those out into an Excel file or into an AutoCAD table. So the workflows, the use cases, they're really endless in this, but we're going to focus on a couple today. And then, there's a lot of settings on how you scan these drawings, what you scan for, what information you're pulling from those objects, and with that you can save templates for particular scan or Data Wizard execution types for maybe it's your site plan quantities, maybe it's your demo plan legend, you name it. There's different setups of Data Wizard you'd want to be able to execute on, and you can save all that stuff to separate templates that you provide to different users. So Data Wizard, it's a 3-tool module. One is the wizard with full controls, and that's where we'll spend a lot of our time. Another one is to create from template. That template I just mentioned, you can load this tool, and all it simply asks for is your output method, and then for you to browse to a template. And then if you're creating legends, again, a focus not today, but in a webcast I did a month or so ago, you can update those AutoCAD tables based on changes that may have occurred in the drawing. So it's a dynamic table in that way. So be sure to check out the creating custom legends with Data Wizard webcast I did a while back. So generally how it works, This is the full wizard I'm showing you here. You choose drawing sources, can be current, XREFs, additional drawings. You can limit it to layouts and viewports. You then choose your objects, so you can see the whole list of object types we can scan for, AutoCAD and Civil 3D objects that you might put in a QTO report, that you might put in Legend. You choose the data. So here's a little preview of all the different data types you can pull. So there's quantity type information, there's style names, descriptions, layer descriptions. If you're dealing with points, we've got raw and full description. There's additional data, and there you can pull things like user-defined properties or block attributes or GIS object data. And then finally, you choose your output. Basically, you can send it to Excel or an AutoCAD table, and then you get all kinds of formatting options on how that report or that table will look. So what we're going to look at today are a couple examples, many different ways to use Data Wizard. It's really one of the most robust tools we've made. So I'll do more webcasts in the future like this, where I show different workflows, different use cases, as more and more people use this tool set. So I'm going to start with a simpler one, which is just a tree survey tabulation. I've got a survey, a whole bunch of points, and the species of the tree was noted in the survey, and I just need to tabulate that stuff, right? Fairly straightforward. And then something a little more complicated, site plan quantities, where we've got all sorts of things. We've got curb and gutter, we've got lighting, we've got vegetation. That stuff might be represented by blocks or Civil 3D feature lines or hatches, and we want to pull lengths, we want to pull areas, we want to count those objects up, right? And we want to spit that out to Excel for perhaps cost estimate, or we could spit it into an AutoCAD table. So that's what we're going to do. We are going to jump into Civil 3D, and I'm going to show you how this works a bit. So like I said, the first example is going to be a simple tree survey tabulation. And so I've got a survey here with a lot of different trees in it. And just for display purposes, I've got the value being labeled in the Cogo point itself. You wouldn't have to necessarily do that, of course. That's just your point label style, however. So to run create my table, I come up here to Data Wizard and I run the setup legend command. And like I'd shown in the PowerPoint, there's 4 main screens here in this wizard, so we'll walk through them. First one here is my drawing sources. I've got current drawing, I've got XREFs. In this case, I don't have any. But if you perhaps had 2 different survey base files, you could XREF one into the other, or you could simply include an additional drawing down here. So the rest of the wizard behaves the same once you specify your drawing sources. We can also limit to a layout there. At this point we're not going to do that, however. The next screen is the objects I can scan for. Okay, so here's all those object types. What are we looking at? We're talking about Cogo points in our drawing. So I can turn on Cogo points. And if I click the refresh button, it's going to tell me right off the bat, I've got 2,000 plus total items, filtered items, that's 112. It's because up here I've got the exclude layers and then frozen checked on. If I turn that off, I'm getting that full data set. Now obviously I don't want frozen points. Those might be ground shots, things like that. So we'll keep that on. And then at this point we click to the next page and we'll see what our scan is giving us. And we can see it's pulling in some storm inlets. There's some of the trees we're after, different tree types. It's pulling in signs. And so one of the things about Data Wizard is it doesn't just scan and then dump everything in there into Excel or AutoCAD table. There's all sorts of ways to filter or weed down the information. And again, all these filters, they save to this template that we can save out right here at any point. So I want to filter this down. I basically want just the trees. So what can I use to filter that? Well, a common thing is layer name or layer description. So let's, before we edit that filter, let's turn on our layer name here so we can see what we're dealing with. And there I see all these Cogo points, and there is a nice unique identifier in the layers, which is just the word tree. So let's go back here, and instead of getting 112 items, let's filter this just so we have layers with the word tree in them. Then I can put an asterisk at the beginning and at the end, so that regardless of where tree falls in the layer name, it will still pick that up. And now we see that filters that down to 85. I hit next, and now I'm starting to get somewhere. Okay, so all that filtering, really simple to use. We can filter by layer name, description, all kinds of other information. We could have done it by raw description, lots of options there. Point groups, of course. So the third screen of Data Wizard is where we specify the information we want from those objects, right? I've chosen my sources. I've told it what objects to pull from those drawing sources, and now I need to tell it what information should come from those objects. Well, I'm doing a quantity takeoff here, so I want something like, if I've got 25 oak trees, I basically want a simple output that says oak and then 25 next to it. So if I click into Data to Extract, I'll turn off some of this information I don't want. Right down there, the count column, turn that on, hit OK, and now we see count showing up over here. Layer description, that's not very helpful to us, so we can go ahead and turn that off as well. Now what I'm pulling is the full description, so I've got my description key set and my coding standards set up so that the full description is something I can use to label. But you wouldn't necessarily have to use this, depending on how your standards are set up. We can also pull additional data. So if I turn that on and I hit OK, I get an additional data, and I get a little ellipsis button here because there's multiple types of information we can pull from these objects. In this case, I've got some user-defined properties, and I've got, as another example of where to pull this information from, I've got tree type assigned here. If I hit OK to that, once we click to the next screen and I start to get my table preview, you can see that tree type user-defined attribute or user-defined property shows up as well. So lots of different ways to handle it. In this case, we'll stick with our full description. That's what's working for us, but can do it either way. So the final screen here is what information, or how am I displaying this information, and what's my output. Okay, so up at the top here, there's a lot of information. Some of this gets real specific to creating legends, right? So capitalization, I can set that to, let's say, uppercase. And then the graphic cell size, we're not displaying the graphic. We're not creating a legend. All we're doing is pulling data out of there. So that doesn't really apply here. And then the graphic scale factors, again, that doesn't apply either. But I can put different headers, different titles on here. So let's say we're going to put a legend on there, and that's just a custom name you can type in there. And then object types, do I want it to say Cogo points? No, I don't really need that in my table. Do I want it to say full description and count for the headers? Don't really need that. So something like this, you don't necessarily need all that, but the option is there. So this is a preview of the output. You can choose what order these columns are in. You can choose how they sort. So it looks like it's sorting appropriately. Oh, actually, it looks like it's out of order. We've got S coming before P. So right up here is data sorting, the top of the view here. And if I tell the Cogo points to sort by full description, and I hit OK to that, it's going to sort by that. I could sort by other things too. I could sort by count or the object name itself. That's this column right here. That's the raw description of the point. So whatever data I've told it to extract, that shows up here as a sorting option. So we're sticking with full description. It sorts accordingly. Now down here, here are my output options. Let's do both of them at the same time. We'll export to Excel, and we'll also generate an AutoCAD table. And then we simply need to pick a AutoCAD table style. It's just a native object. And instead of the paper space legend, we'll go with the legend itself. And we're going to bump up the cell size a little bit on this. The graphic cell size, as I said, they dictate the size of the cells that the graphics are within. They also control the minimum width when you have just text showing up in there, the minimum width of that cell of your AutoCAD table. So you can browse out here to where you're going to save this. Now I'll click the Finish button. It's going to prompt me to enter an insertion point. So I made a model space table, so I'll just kind of drop it over here. It's going to generate that table for me. And then at the same time, it should generate my Excel output. Okay, so I told it to do both. So pretty straightforward, right? Gives me my description and then the quantity of those tables within, or of those points following that description. If I close out of that, here's the same information in an AutoCAD table. Now you might have heard me mention that this stuff is all dynamic, so as things change, maybe in more of a, if it's a proposed drawing and quantities are changing, anything that might be added or removed, we can use our update table command. So let's delete one of these pine points and delete one of these fir points, for example. Remove those. Now all those settings that I use to create this table right here, this QTO, they're all saved within this AutoCAD table object. So if I run the update legend command and I simply click on that table, I get a really simple interface that says what AutoCAD table, the one selected, what template, read from the table itself. Now I could browse out and grab a template, but instead I'll just say read the settings from the table. What we're going to see is this pine one drops one, and then the fir quantity dropped as well. I'm not sure if you caught it there, but the tables will update based on what's in the drawing. So big time savings, big error prevention options there. So I did this for the whole drawing. We could do the same kind of thing. What if we want tables per sheet? Fairly straightforward. I'll run through it a little bit more quickly here. The only addition we want now is to limit to a layout, right? And we also want to trim it to this specific viewport. I hit next. Okay, all my settings are going to be saved in here. It's going to remember the tree filter I put in there. It's remembering the data I want to extract, the full description and the count. The sorting is all there, but notice the list is smaller because I've trimmed it to just this layout and viewport. The difference now is we're just making a table right in our sheet, so I'm going to turn off Excel, and instead of the legend table style, I'm going to use the paper space legend. And now because I'm in paper space, and this is all just kind of basic AutoCAD and Civil 3D standards stuff, I'm dealing on at a much smaller scale, right? So I don't want a width of 20. 20 would give me a table that would be almost the size of my sheet. So I need to dial that down some. We'll go down to 2. And then finally, we'll turn on that tree count column for the legend. And then I'm going to save this out to a template. So we'll call this the tree count, and it just saves a data wizard template file. It's really just a basic text file. And these are files you could save out and provide, like I said, to users. They can reference these things to use them to have legends or QTOs built really quickly for them, or perhaps most of the settings are there and they need to tweak something, like the layout name or the viewport, something like that. So I'll hit save to this. And if I hit finish, it prompts me for an insertion point. Drop that right in paper space. It's going to create that AutoCAD table for me. And it's again limited to just this viewport. Of course, if I ran it again right here, I can load that template right off the bat. And I did run, instead of just the legend from template command, I ran the full setup legend because why? Well, I need to change one thing on my template, which is the layout name and the viewport itself. I can now click through all these settings because I know they're good. Hit finish, drop that in here, and I'll get a different tree count table based on just this viewport. So all these trees right here, those are showing up there. Okay. So big time savings on this, right? It's real error proof because we know it's counting exactly what's in our drawings. And it gives me a preview as I'm walking through this. It tells me how many of those objects am I getting, right? And we can even check this stuff. And I've got one aspen tree, it says. There's that one aspen showing up. No other aspens, right? So let's go on to another example. We said we were going to do one for a site plan quantity takeoff. So I've got another drawing set up here with a variety of things in it that we would commonly include in a QTO. Maybe it's a site plan, maybe it's a paving plan, a grading plan. Whatever the case may be, there's often a lot of things to count up. So I've got some of those things thrown in here. You see some trees in here, some shrubs. Of course, I've got some seeding, or maybe it's turf I'm laying down, sod. I've got bituminous paving in the parking lot here. I've got seeding within those curb islands. I've got a variety of walkways, the yellow here. That's all 4-inch concrete pavement. You see some overhead lights. Okay, this is just kind of a sampling. It's typically, you got a lot more going on than even just this, but just for this demonstration, we got at least 8 or 9 or 10 different object types we want to pull from this one drawing, from this one QTO. And they're not all the same object type. Some of them are blocks. That's the trees here and the signs. Some of them are hatches. So the hatching for the bituminous pavement. And then some of them are Civil 3D objects. In this case, our curb lines. We want to quantify the length of our curb. These are feature lines. So I pick on that. That's a feature line. Right, one of these has a specific 2D length. I need to quantify all that as well. So Civil 3D and AutoCAD objects that we're dealing with here. And this one we're going to take out to Excel so that we can run and go and put an estimate together or Perhaps it just needs to be saved out for other purposes. So let's run Data Wizard on this drawing. One quick question that did come in: does the QTO read XREF data? Absolutely. So it's in this first screen here where you're choosing what information you're scanning for. So current drawing is the scenario we've been showing so far. But if I had some XREFs in here, those would show up, and those would be included in objects in the next drawing. So XREFs, current drawing, or additional drawings that aren't even part of this. Say you're building a big project-wide legend or a quantity takeoff, and you don't even necessarily have all those drawings XREF'd into one sheet, but you need to scan all those for all these different object types. You can do that with this in one fell swoop. A reminder, yes, the webcast is being recorded. All of our webcasts are recorded. You can find them on our YouTube page. So let's continue on here. We're running Data Wizard on this site plan. We're scanning the current drawing. Of course, it could be a sheet drawing where it wasn't current drawing, but it was simply just the XREF of the site base file. Right? A lot of different workflows there. That's a common one. And I'm going to scan all of model space, so I'm not going to limit to a particular layout. I hit Next. Again, I probably want to exclude frozen layers. Wouldn't have to, but we're going to exclude frozen layers in this case. And then what kind of objects do we want to look for? Well, we had said we've got hatches. That represents some of the paving and the seating. Now, it wouldn't have to be the hatches themselves. It could be the hatch boundaries we created. We could then pull areas from those polylines. Either way, you can choose. We've got blocks. Those are our trees, our shrubs, our overhead lights. And then we also have some feature lines, which represent the curb lines. And if you're not sure, you can always just turn on other objects. Do I have some polyline information I need to quantify? Not quite sure. Just turn it on, and on the next screen it'll tell us what we're getting, and then we can make decisions from there. So if I hit refresh to this, it looks like I'm getting a lot of different object types here. And I've got a few filters on. I think that was from my practicing of this before the webcast. We've got some filtering over here. This is based on the exclude layers for frozen. So right off the bat, that excluded some feature lines that were frozen. So hitting next, now we get the results of the scan. What's in our drawing? Let's take a look at the blocks. We're getting a block name column right here. We're getting the layer it's showing up on. We're getting the layer description. That's looking pretty good, but our column information isn't quite right. I want to get the count for all these blocks. So I can turn on count. And I don't really need layer name in my final QTO report, but it can be helpful to leave on. So we'll leave that on for the moment. What I don't need is the graphic itself. I'm not creating a legend where I want symbology in it. I'm creating a QTO report. So I hit OK. Now that count column starts to show up. And that's looking pretty good. We've got our street light, two different tree types, and then shrubs. Take a look at our feature lines. Looks like it's pulling through a variety of feature lines. We've got curb feature lines on the curb layer, curb back. Then we've got some other feature lines that we don't care about. So again, we can do some filtering here. What do we want to filter by? Well, I'm just quantifying in feature lines. I just want to quantify my curb, and I don't want to count like the flange of the curb and the back of the curb twice. Otherwise, I'd get double the quantity. So let's filter by just layers that have curb back in them. So if I go back here to my feature lines, set this to curb back, that trims down to 6. Now if I hit next and take a look, now I'm just getting those back at curb feature lines. The layer description, concrete, curb, and gutter, and then the count. We don't want to count those up, we want to get 2D lengths from those. So I can turn on that column, and now it's summing the 2D lengths of all those feature lines. Moving on to our hatches. We've got some different hatches coming through. We've got the building outline, or the building hatching rather. The walkway, that's the yellow stuff here. We do want to quantify that. And then the bituminous pavement, that looks good. And then the seating, we also want to quantify that. And it's nice handy names coming up through the layer description. So oftentimes layer description is an underutilized property. Sometimes they're not even filled out properly in people's templates. And they're often just a guide on what you put on that layer. But they become more valuable with Data Wizard because we can pull that information to use to identify different object types in our legends or in our QTOs. So what we're after here is what? I should filter by pave layers and vegetation layers. Simple enough, go back to my filters here. And the syntax that you are familiar with in, say, like a Windows File Explorer search, all of that same syntax works here. So asterisk, pave, asterisk, comma, and the same for veggie. And when I click OK to this, you're going to see this hatch filtered items trimmed down by 1. We were pulling that building hatching in. We didn't really want that. And now we've trimmed that down. Now you may have noticed this little checkbox here. You can simply do one-time overrides like this, but what I like to do is try to make a more dynamic filter so that when I save this out to a template, it's not just those random object types. I express a finite set of objects that I want to come through. I said only include pave layers and vegetation layers. If I'm just kind of checking or unchecking things, while it can be nice, it's handy, I try to aim towards using the filters as much as possible. And so what do we want with hatches? Of course, we want to pull our area information, so I can turn on that, and there it is summing areas. It's based on the drawing units, feet in this case. And then we turned on polylines because, well, we weren't sure what polyline information we have on the drawing. Maybe I do need to quantify some of that. There's that building outline. There's the pavement, the walkway pavement, the bituminous pavement, and the seating hatching. These are all hatch outlines. So we could use these to get our areas, or we could do the hatches. Now we already did it with the hatches, so we can leave these alone, but you're going to see those same quantities showing up. So a lot of different ways to pull your quantities. I'm going to get rid of the polylines option here. We're starting to look pretty good now. Let's think about what information we want to pull from these objects. I don't necessarily want all of this in my report. I don't need the layer name, layer description. That's handy in this case. Layer description is probably the most common property you're going to use on objects for QTOs or legends in cases where you're pulling from multiple object types. Because think about it, what property can blocks and feature lines and hatches, what property can they all have in column, or excuse me, in common, so that they all appear in one column? Layer description. So if it's all, say, Cogo points you're dealing with, you could pull through, like we'd shown, the user-defined property for tree type. You could pull through the raw description, or like what we did in the other case was pull the full description. A lot of different ways. So if you've got a variety of object types, you're likely going to go to layer description. So there is a little standard setup involved in this, of course, but it's pretty straightforward. And the webcast I did a few weeks ago, in fact, talks about configuration of Data Wizard to work for your standards and your workflows. Because it's really a pretty powerful tool, but it's based on the data you have in your drawings and how your templates are set up. So we're looking pretty good at this point. We're going to hit next. And here's the output option. On the onset, we said we were going to do an Excel export. So we're leaving that down here. It's just Excel. Again, we could do the AutoCAD table. Because it's Excel, things like the cell size, the scale factors of the graphics, that stuff, again, doesn't really play a role here, but that's more in legend creation. Really, the only difference between QTOs and automatic legend creation is the output, right? But the idea is the same. You're scanning drawings for what information I have there to report on or to tabulate. I can do a legend title. I don't really care about that. If I want to show object types, that might be handy. Right? This isn't like planned production quality stuff. I just want to spit out an Excel sheet that shows me information. The objects column. Objects column is this column right here. It's the way we identify the objects. So with blocks, it's the block name. With feature lines, it's the line type and the layer it resides on. With hatches, it's the hatch name and then layer they reside on. So baked into Data Wizard are these handy ways where it kind of separates or identifies unique or like items. And these are examples for blocks or feature lines or hatches. You don't really need the hatchet or the objects column in this case because we've got the layer description column. And then depending on the order you want, you can move this stuff around. Maybe it's count and then length and then area. I'm going to put this out to Excel. I'm going to hit the Finish command. It's going to build that Excel table and it's going to open it for me automatically. And there's our report. Now, if you're dealing with different object types, right, you're going to get, I'm going to get the count of my hatches. I'm going to get the count of my feature lines. That's fine. Use the value you want for your purposes. But these are the object type information that we told it to give us. Here are the headers, the layer description, the count, the 2D length, the area, so on and so forth. So pretty straightforward. Specify your drawing sources, your object types, the information in those objects, and then how do you want to export this information. So lots of different use cases for this. I just wanted to show you a couple for today, but I suggest you guys, if you don't already have the CIM Project Suite, go and get it and start playing with this. Let me know what you think of it. This is one of our newer tools we're pretty excited about. We've got new enhancements coming down the road on it as well. We did just release a new update to the CIM Project Suite. If you don't have that, it was just a few weeks ago. It's 20.0.1. Go ahead and get that. There's a few bug fixes and enhancements to tools in there. So a summary of Data Wizard for QTO. We're saving a lot of time, not just by not manually counting, but by using one tool for all of our objects, right? We can do Civil 3D and AutoCAD objects. We eliminate errors, of course, by not using different tool sets. What if I use QTO Manager and then data extraction and then I manually count some stuff? I don't know about you, but you're asking for it if you're doing all these different methods. The outputs can be Excel or an AutoCAD table. You know, I've gotten a few requests for a shapefile export, so we might add that in the future as well. And then, of course, we can save templates for the easy repetition of different types of QTOs or legends. And a question that came in, is this available now? Absolutely. Data Wizard is in the CIM Project Suite now. The version I'm showing you is exactly what the public version is right now. So yeah, go check it out. Go to ctcsoftware.com. That's where you can get access to it. So with that, I think I will close it down. Thanks everyone for watching.